Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good Sunday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service. It is the 16th of February now, and as we go through the weekend, we'll continue to update you on our very latest goings-on there. As always, you can find the latest information at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. Give us a call on the Weather Info line at 800-472-0391. Find each Weather Service office on Twitter, NWS Fairbanks, NWS Anchorage, and NWS Juneau. We'll get you there to the Anchorage or the Alaska accounts if you like to follow your areas locally, or you can find many others across the rest of the nation. Find us on U.S. National Weather Service Alaska on Facebook, and many of you have, and share our information regularly that way with your friends, and we certainly do appreciate you spreading the weather safety message. And as always, you can find us on YouTube in the afternoons. If you look for NWS Anchorage, you can get the daily afternoon map briefing, just the surface charts there in about 2.5 minutes in length, so just a quick bite of what's going on around the entire state at once. And then after this show on alaskapublic.org, of course, you can find the entire broadcast of what you're watching right now online, or if you go directly through YouTube, just search for AKWX TV. That's the shorter version of Alaska Weather TV, of course. If you bookmark that or subscribe to it, you'll always know when the very latest version of this show has published online. That usually happens a little bit after the show in the evening hours. Here's a look at what's going on across the entire state. We've dropped the watches and warnings for southeast. The warnings and advisories are gone for south central, and now we're really focused on the northern parts of the interior, mainly north of the Yukon. You're dealing with winter weather advisories all the way from the Yukon border out to the Chukchi Seacoast. And there have been some high wind warnings in effect. Those have been dropped now for the Chukchi Seacoast, but we're still dealing with winter weather conditions and even blizzard conditions in some cases there, including the St. Lawrence Island Seacoast and out around the Bering Strait. Interior, we're looking at winter weather conditions, mainly light snow, but most of that is blowing snow, so it's a visibility issue on top of a wind chill issue, and that's really what we have north of the Brooks Range summits. Is a lot less snow falling, but a lot more of that wind chill factor. It could feel like 50 to 55 below as we go into Monday afternoon and evening. So continued cold weather and wind threat mainly for the northern parts of the interior, and wind and falling snow and poor visibility threatening parts of the Bering Strait coast down to St. Lawrence Island. So certainly feeling like full-on winter across the northern parts of our state. And blizzard warnings still in effect for the Pribilofs there. You've been dealing with on and off blizzard conditions for a good part of the day since early this morning, and it looks like that threat may continue as we head into tomorrow. So again, a blizzard warning in effect for you. Now, poor visibility and wind will likely affect many other parts of the central and eastern Aleutians. If we look at the visible satellite picture here, you can see several waves of low pressure, a lot of that cold air just dropping southward quickly. And if you look carefully, you can see some of the cloud streets breaking through some of the gaps there across the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. A lot of what we're looking at across the interior is still pretty much clear. We've got a lot of cloud cover spiraling around the Alaska Range, but a lot of drier air here across the Yukon and Kuskokwim valleys, and cloud cover just bursting through the Bering Strait and trying to push that ice edge farther and farther south. Now across southeast, you can see the low pressure system here just west of Haida Gwaii is working northward once again. You'll see that show up on the map here in just a little bit. This could bring an added surge of warmer and maybe some wetter air into southern parts of southeast perhaps by Tuesday afternoon. In the meantime, pretty dry air across the Gulf. The circulations that are sitting here across Kodiak Island and South Central are primarily using the moisture coming out of the eastern parts of the Gulf, and everything here, just the speckling of the satellite imagery tells us that air is really cold and it's really pretty dry. So not a whole lot of moisture making its way up into the western parts of the Gulf. Anything that you see here wrapping into Kodiak Island or the Alaska Peninsula is coming up and over and surviving the transition all the way over the mountains once again. Here's a look at the infrared satellite picture, and you can still see that speckledy kind of color and shape pattern there across the south central parts of the Bering Sea, and then everything really smooths out with the stratus. In fact, we're probably looking at some ice here if we're not actually looking at the clouds. A lot of cold air across the interior, as you would expect. Look at the map as it goes into motion here. You can see that low pressure system across southeast also working up the southeastern coastline. A lot of strong wind just grabbing onto that colder, drier air across the northern parts of the Brooks Range and certainly the Yukon Valley. One more time for the loop, and you'll notice also that a little burst of white cloud cover here coming across south central Alaska. Each time one of those works through, usually every couple hours or so, we get a little round of snow showers, whether that's around Homer and Seward, around the Kenai Peninsula, around Kenai itself, or perhaps around Anchorage in the valley. And every time it seems like we pick up maybe about a couple tenths of an inch, maybe an inch if you're up a little bit higher in the mountains there, and that's probably true many other places as you go out into the bush a little bit more. Here's a look at the actual surface chart in today's weather map. Low pressure sitting just across the Yukon border is holding back some of the coldest air. Of course, the mountains are helping to make that possible. Low pressure sitting around the Barren Islands is spinning around 974 millibars, and we've got another wave south and mainly west of Haida Gwaii at 974 millibars. So really everything you see out here is really pretty dry air. The air is blowing, and with that and a little bit of snow falling in occasional places, mainly due to terrain lifting that up and helping it to kind of start that snow process, we're creating those blizzard conditions in places like the Pribilofs. And it's windy and occasionally snowy out around the western tip of the Seward Peninsula and Norton Sound, and wind and poor visibility around the Arctic coast and also around parts of the interior, including Anaktuvuk Pass. Here's a look at tonight's forecast then. Low pressure working up across the southeastern coast will create mainly rain mixed with snow. Temperatures today were hovering just above the freezing point in places like Juneau, picking up a couple tenths of an inch. Yakutat, really not a terribly wet day by comparison to many others that have been so much more soggy. Snow showers will continue around Prince William Sound and the Kenai Peninsula. Even the Anchorage Bowl could see a few of those around the Kodiak Island area, and also kind of a onshore flow to the northern side of the Alaska Peninsula and the central and eastern Aleutians. Around the Kotzebue Sound region, snow and blowing snow will continue. A very gusty day there today with gusts over 40, even 50 miles per hour at times. And really more of the same for the Brooks Range. There are occasional snow showers, but a lot of blowing snow, especially over some of the mountain passes. The pattern looks pretty messy across the Gulf as we head into Monday. We are still under the influence of a very broad upper level pattern that's keeping that low pressure system from the Arctic sitting right over Alaska. And as that happens, the circulations at the surface may occasionally organize and then kind of spread out and then organize, and kind of you get the drift. Each one of these black lines is a trough of low pressure. It's not really a cold or a warm front, but it's a transition zone where low pressure is focused. And each time one of those passes over, it's probably enough to stir up the winds or perhaps shift the wind direction, or create some snow showers in your vicinity, especially if you're in the interior, west, or south central. Or any one of those things are possible in combination. For southeast, you can see periods of rain and snow across the region. Really nothing organized at all. But wait until we get into Tuesday. It looks like another wave of low pressure works in from the Pacific Northwest. We organize some colder air coming off the continent and moving into the western Gulf. A little bit of a ridge here in the middle. The clouds may break up briefly. We'll see what happens when this combines a little bit, but that might bring a slightly better chance of snow showers to parts of southeast and the Gulf Coast a little bit further northward. In the meantime, looking northward still, high pressure is organizing, so this is interesting. This should start to settle the winds down a little bit across the Arctic coast, which is probably exactly what you're looking for. It may push that pressure pattern a little bit tighter across some parts of the Bering Sea and perhaps even farther south. You can see the pressure lines getting a little bit closer together here across south central and southeast. But again, that should maybe settle things down a little bit for the Arctic coast. So maybe some changes you like there. And low pressure coming across the Aleutians, getting a little bit closer. Chances are this is going to fizzle out here as it's running into this pattern. Every time we've had a storm in the last couple of days that's moved northward, it's really lost a lot of its punch running into this pretty persistent pattern. So it doesn't have a whole lot of upper level support that'll keep that going as it crosses over the chain. Looking at southeast, then temperatures will remain in the mid-30s for the next couple hours. You can see around Juneau today, 34 degrees, 36 around Annette and Ketchikan. One of the warmest spots today, Heidelberg, I believe, 39 degrees. Same goes for Ketchikan today. Around Yakutat, temperatures were holding in the mid-30s. Around 29 in Cordova today, 30 in Middleton Island, 19 around Anchorage, and low to mid-20s for a good part of the Kenai Peninsula. Single-digit territory around the Copper River Basin today after it was snowing yesterday. 3 around Fairbanks, 5 below around Eagle, and Fort Yukon showing 6 below last hour. Around Tanana, temperatures made it to about 2 above. Arctic Village holding at 3 above this afternoon. And then there's the Arctic Coast. Wow. And that is just the temperature. That is not the feels like index or the wind chill index, what it really feels like when the rubber meets the road, or the ice road, I guess, as it were. Anywhere from 15 to 30 below across the coast. 14 below in Barrow, 18 below in Kaktovik, Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse about 27 below. So yeah, wow, that's really cold. And so if the wind settles down, conditions will rapidly improve, at least for how it feels there. It may still be awfully cold, of course. Across Kotzebue Sound region, 5 to 10 below for most areas. Kivalina showing 6 below. Kotzebue about 1 above, 2 below. In Shishmaref, our friends in Nome showing 9 above at this hour. St. Lawrence Island about 2 below. And again, blizzard conditions there running down through the Bering Strait and probably all the way down to the Pribilof. So just brutal conditions there with wind and snow and poor visibility. As you get out toward McGrath, made it to 0 today. Wow, that's pretty uncomfortable there with a little bit of the breeze blowing through. No doubt it felt considerably colder. Sparivon, and many cases west of the Alaska Range, anywhere from 0 to about plus or minus 5. Most areas around the Bristol Bay, again with ice in the bay now, holding at or just above 0, anywhere from 3 to Dillingham and 6 in King Salmon. Teens as you run into the Alaska Peninsula, Sandpoint about 19, Cold Bay and False Pass in the low to mid-20s. Low teens for the Pribilofs today with a lot of wind, 25 in Dutch Harbor and Alaska, 27 in Adak, and Shemya was 30 degrees. Overnight low temps back in the mid-20s for a good part of southeast. Sitka about 33, Ketchikan, Annette, Heidelberg all in the lower 30s. Kodiak looking at 15 overnight as you start your Monday, President's Day and Washington's birthday, I believe. 12 in Anchorage, single digits for Talkeetna, and 21 below in Fairbanks, with overnight lows in the northern interior from 15 to 30 below. The Arctic coast looking at 20 to about 35 below. Again, the cold spot honors may go to Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse once again. Kotzebue Sound looking at temperatures holding in the low teens, 10 below in Nome, 9 below in Unalakleet. Southwest looking at about 12 below around Bethel, and just below 0 for the Bristol Bay region. The Pribilofs about 9 above, and the chain in the teens and 20s for the most part. With South Central tomorrow making it back in the low to mid-20s, low to mid-30s for a good part of southeast, with coastal areas closer to 40 degrees. The Copper River Basin and Glen Ellen about 5. Prince William Sound expecting high temperatures tomorrow in the mid-20s. The interior probably closer to 0 west of Fairbanks, and any of those areas could easily go below 0, but not by too much. Looks like Ambler and Bettles probably 5 to 10 below. Anaktuvuk past 21 below. And again, that visibility going over some of those passes may be a little bit tricky, so take your time and be extra careful. 10 to 20 below for the Arctic coast, again not factoring in the wind chill. Nome's looking at 3 above. St. Lawrence Island closer to 0. Nunavak Island 3, and Dillingham and King Salmon likely in the lower teens, with the Alaska Peninsula back in the low to mid-20s, including Dutch Harbor and Alaska, and the Aleutians in the low 30s. Flying weather then will be tricky across the west coast and through the Bering Strait. If you're anywhere in this vicinity, conditions are not going to be friendly, whether it's visibility or turbulence or you're looking for. For southeast, MVFR conditions running up and down the coast, IFR conditions closer to the hillsides and the passes. And for parts of, well, let's say Seward, all the way down through probably down to about Homer maybe, but a little bit more on the eastern side. You're looking at IFR conditions. That should be pretty limited to the coastline though. MVFR through the coastline sections of the Prince William Sound region and also across parts of the Alaska Peninsula. Here's the past conditions. Then Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass expected to start at IFR, but improvements should be seen during the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions through a large part of the day. Rainy Pass, probably marginal through most of your Monday. Windy Pass should be VFR, and Isabel Pass is looking a lot better tomorrow as well. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see visual flight rule through most of the day. Tanita Pass looks pretty good, and Portage Pass, IFR conditions as we just saw. Some improvements throughout the day. The west side right now looks to be VFR, but again, the Prince William Sound side probably socked in. And Chilkoot and White Pass likely turning over to IFR conditions as the day goes on, with numerous snow showers expected in the region. The freezing levels, well, as you would expect with the cold we have, the pattern has not changed, and therefore neither has the surface freezing line. Sure, it's wiggled a little bit, but mostly it's south of the chain in the Alaska Peninsula and pretty much riding down the southeastern coastline with some elevated freezing lines sneaking up past Haida Gwaii around 2,000 feet. And that is it. It's just cold. And the icing potential, well, it's pretty limited. Most of it, we did get some reports today around south central and southeast. Most of it, though, really limited to light to isolated moderate and mainly rime below 6,000 and 8,000 feet across coastal sections, the Alaska Peninsula, and down into southeast. Now, below 2,000 feet, of course, with the blizzard conditions there around the Pribilovs and out around the St. Matthew Island waters, that level should be a lot lower, and there is moisture to make that happen. The jet stream pattern looks like this. Really not much change. The one thing I did note today that's a little bit different is this pretty broad king, high pressure ridge starting to build around the Kamchatka Peninsula. Really what that seems to be doing, though, is reinforcing the low pressure system across most of Alaska, really allowing that cold air to drop in and further enhancing this area of low pressure. So not much to really kick this out of place and get things kind of moving in a progressive pattern at this point. We've got the strongest winds well south of Alaska. That's the main jet pattern there that's feeding any weather across the lower 48. So without any movement there, it looks like we're locked into continued cold for the moment. At 9,000 feet, low pressure sitting across about Shelikof Strait or so, giving us a pretty good southerly flow into eastern parts of the interior and the coastal areas of southeast and south central. To the west, we've locked into the cold and the stronger winds below that around the Seward Peninsula, YK Delta, and a good part of the central and eastern Aleutians. At 9,000 feet, a similar pattern here. You'll notice that easterly flow coming across the Yukon, northerlies diving down the YK Delta. A little bit of lesser winds at this level between the central and western Aleutians. A stronger south and southeasterly flow showing up there at 40 knots. That's responsible from that. That's from the high pressure ridge we were seeing there building out across the Kamchatka Peninsula. Other than that, we have the west and southwesterly flow making it into southeastern Alaska, and those cold northeasterly winds making it over the Brooks Range summits between 25 and as strong as 50 knots or so. So no doubt there's going to be some serious wind chill issues there continuing as we head into Monday and probably Tuesday. Tomorrow's turbulence, then, we're watching the Arctic coast and the Chukchi Seacoast, especially below 6,000 feet. There will be some very strong winds cruising over the coastlines there and some of the higher terrain. Below 6,000 feet, you should watch out for light to isolated moderate across parts of the Yukon and the Kuskokwim valleys, as well as the Brooks Range summits, and certainly a little bit further south into the Chugach and Wrangell-St. Elias region. For southern parts of southeast, below 6,000 feet, you might even see occasional moderate there, and certainly looking at some gap flow and low-level wind shear issues across the Aleutians and around Bristol Bay. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Guitar, Eugene.
No. You're John King, and I'm Martha King. And today we're going to talk about a subject that will change the way you look at weather. Well, at least the way you look at weather reports and forecasts anyway.
In North America, we've used the old familiar SAs and FTs for the past 40 years. But since 1968, the rest of the world has been using the METAR-TAF format. Now, METAR officially stands for Aviation Routine Weather Report, and TAF stands for Terminal Aerodrome Forecast. Now, METAR and TAF are the worldwide standard for all aviation weather reports and forecasts in this shrinking world.
This new code and format is not a great deal different from what you're used to. And in some ways, it will make reading and interpreting the weather much quicker and easier than it's been in the past. You'll find that in many cases, particularly in the forecasts or TAFs, you'll have more weather information available to you.
Learning to read this code is not only helpful in reading METARs and TAFs, but you'll also be able to read the same code when it's used in area forecast, airmets, SIGMETs, pilot reports, and other sources of weather information.
Learning this code will ensure that you can read weather reports and forecasts from computer terminals at your local airport. And you'll also be able to read those formerly mysterious military weather reports. In many cases, military reports will give you a weather forecast for an airport much closer to your home airport.
And here's the best news. We're going to make all this easy to learn and give you neat ways of remembering the codes.
But now, let's join John as he gets started with the new codes and orders.
Let's begin with the METAR. Now remember, that officially stands for Aviation Routine Weather Report, but you can think of it as Meteorological Aviation Routine because that'll make it easy to remember. The METAR coding is also the basis for the coding used in the Terminal Aerodrome Forecast, or TAFs, the area forecast, and SIGMETs and AirMets, so this coding is going to be very useful for you and well worth learning. Now in METAR, the order after the identifier and the date and the time is like this. It's a report modifier. You can think of that as who. We'll talk more about that later on. The wind, the visibility, the RVR where it's available, the present weather, the sky condition, the temperature and dew point, the altimeter setting, and remarks. Now let's look at each individual item and find a fun and easy way to remember the sequence and also to identify the separate items in the report. So let's take a look at them in the New World Order.
If you get your weather off of DUAT or get hard copy printout from the flight service station, this is what you're probably going to see. The METAR, our Aviation Routine Weather Report, the hourly routine observation. Occasionally, however, you might see a SPECI. SPECI stands for a special observation. The weather met some kind of criteria that had them put out a special observation. But METAR and SPECI will be the lead element of the report, depending on whether it's the hourly routine observation, that's what you'll see most of the time, or whether it's a special observation or SPECI.
All right, here is a look at the sea ice edge. We haven't had an update from that just yet. We'll have the latest observations and the sea ice as we head into Monday there, so watch for that. Anytime you'd like to check on the conditions, the mapping tools, or perhaps the outlook for your specific area, you can easily go to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php, and you'll have the information to make a map very similar to this if it's an area of concern for you and your community. But as of Friday, the edge of the ice had not yet made it to the Pribilofs, but it certainly had passed Nunivak Island, had built into Bristol Bay, and had passed the St. Matthew Island waters, again with the slightly lower concentrations near the leading edge of that, but certainly more or less a solid sheet there as you head up toward St. Lawrence Island, a little bit of a shadow there south of the island itself. So again, the tools you need there at weather.gov/Anchorage. Here's a look at southeast wind forecast now for the marine areas and the waves and sea heights there in blue. You'll notice very little change from what we were talking about yesterday. Mostly a south and easterly flow coming up to Clarence and Chatham Straits until you get to the northern Lynn Canal, and you're dealing with more of a northerly flow there, 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Southeasterlies offshore of Gustavus, around 10-foot seas expected there with a 25-knot wind, and an onshore flow coming into Yakutat and Icy Cape, 10-foot seas on a 20-knot wind. And that reverses course on Tuesday, more of an offshore flow up and down the coast. Higher gusts are possible there across the central and southern parts of the inner channels. More of a northerly flow there across the Lynn Canal, a 25-knot wind with a 4-foot sea. Across South Central, the winds are subsiding. More of a variable flow at times around Prince William Sound, all the way down toward Kodiak Island on either side, around the areas west of the Barren Islands, and a light northerly flow will persist across the Cook Inlet at 10 knots with a 2-foot sea. As we get into Tuesday, north and northwesterly winds start to pick up once again, with low pressure redeveloping here and strengthening somewhat across the western Gulf. 20 to 25-knot winds coming out of the Cook Inlet over the southern tip of the Kenai, and an easterly flow strengthens there north of, south I should say, of the Prince William Sound region. Northeasterlies inside Prince William Sound also picking up, so we probably have some Copper River Basin winds trying to pick up there as we head into Tuesday. Northerlies coming out of the Resurrection Bay at 20 knots, also maybe occasionally gusty at 7-foot seas are expected. Northeasterlies over the ice in Bristol Bay at 10 knots, coming into the north side of the Alaska Peninsula at 25 knots, 17-foot seas there north of Cold Bay. Northwesterlies and northerlies across the Pacific side, 25 knots with a 7 to 9-foot sea. By Tuesday, a more uniform northwesterly flow coming across the peninsula. Freezing spray will remain an issue there with 15-knot winds and 20-knot winds there on the Pacific side with 8 to 9-foot seas for Tuesday. Across Across the Aleutian Islands on Monday for President's Day, northwesterly wind coming across anywhere from Adak to Nikolsky to Unalaska, 30 to 35 knots on either side. On the Bering Sea side, though, we're dealing with 17 to 20-foot seas, and on the Pacific side, 8 to 13-foot seas. Across the central and western parts of the chain, winds are diminished somewhat, 15 to 25 knots from the north and northeast, with 9 to 12-foot seas from Attu to Kiska. On Tuesday, northwesterlies diminished somewhat across the Bering Sea side, still going around 15 to 20 knots for the Pacific side, 7 to 8-foot seas on the Pacific side, and 8 to 9-foot seas on the Bering Sea side. And we continue with winds around 25 to 30 knots, picking up a little bit there out in the west. For the west coast, pretty broad northerly flow coming down the west coast and over the Pribilofs and the St. Matthew Island waters, with seas between 11 and 13 foot in most of the sea ice-free areas. Freezing spray is still going to be an issue there, of course, and 25 to 30 knot winds will continue as we head into Tuesday. The winds become a little more variable around the Pribilofs, with a 5-foot sea, 8-foot seas around the St. Matthew Island waters, and more of an offshore flow out of the Kuskokwim Bay, coming around 30 knots or so. Across the Arctic coast, a broad northeasterly flow sweeps across the Arctic coast and the Brooks Range summits. Look for light winds north of Barrow, 15 to 20 knot winds across the Beaufort Sea coast, and 20 to 35 knot winds coming down the Chukchi Sea coast, likely with some higher gusts. The winds diminish greatly as we look at Tuesday across the North Slope, and then once you run down toward Point Hope, 15 to 30 knot winds pick up once again across the Kotzebue Sound. We're still holding onto a 30 knot wind. Recapping tonight's weather, occasional snow showers will continue around any Gulf Coast community, it looks like. The exceptions being closer to the southeastern coastline, where you might see a little bit more of a rain and snow mix there. Most areas will remain pretty light. Scattered snow showers across most of the Brooks Range summits as well. Poor visibility and winter weather advisories have been issued there, as well as wind chill advisories for the Arctic coast and the Chukchi Sea coast, with blizzard warnings continuing for the Pribilofs tonight and parts of the western tip under a winter storm warning. Look for light snow across Bristol Bay with continued wind there, and a pretty much similar day as we head into Tuesday.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Join Alaska Public Media for Estate Planning for Modern Families.